Rick stood on top of the garbage heap but was suddenly pushed down by the woman next to him. Rick was dazed from the fall, but when he got up, he discovered there was a zombie in the vicinity, covered in spikes. Feeling anxious, Rick realized that the narrow space made it impossible to maneuver properly. He managed to grab a keyboard from behind and slammed it hard onto the zombie, but it only pushed the zombie back a few steps. The rubbish on the floor also restricts his movement. As the zombie approached again, weaponless Rick had no choice but to use his hands to defend himself, but the spikes pierced through his palms. Rick endured the pain and pushed the zombie away with force. The space was too cramped, only 7 or 8 square feet in size. Rick tries to kick the zombie away, but the blades on the zombie cut his legs, causing more pain in his arms and legs. Before Rick could catch his breath, the zombie approached once more. Remaining calm, Rick observed his surroundings, thinking he might find a way to climb out. Otherwise, if he continued like this, he would either be eaten by the zombie when his strength ran out or be impaled by the spikes above. As Rick climbed up about 2 or 3 meters, he lost his grip and fell, hitting a metal barrel. He turned to see the damned zombie approaching again. If it pounced on him, he'd be doomed. Meanwhile, Michonne outside was extremely anxious, loudly suggesting he use the walls. Rick heard the hint and suddenly realized the falling rubbish knocked the zombie down, and Rick finally breathed a sigh of relief. He then triggered more collapses until the zombie was pinned and unable to move. Rick picked up a piece of cloth, wrapped a shard of glass, and fiercely stabbed the zombie's head multiple times. Venting his frustration with the zombie dealt with, Rick looked at the woman and said, "Now, do you believe us? Tell me what you want, and I'll find it for you." The woman remained silent and gestured to have the rope thrown down. Enduring the pain in his hands and legs, Rick climbed back up. A few minutes later, Rick stood up once again. The woman looked at him again, with a hint of admiration in her eyes. Then she spoke, saying she needed guns, a lot of them. If Rick could provide them, she would immediately help him in the fight. Rick glanced at Michonne and the others with a satisfied smile. A few minutes later, they descended from the garbage heap.
You know we will win?
Oh, I know it.
After we get half of what's won.
You'll get a third. And we're taking back what you just stole from us.
Half.
A third.
Half.
A third.
A third, and we keep what we stole. Half of the jars. The ones we took. One time, this time. Yes. Say yes.
Yes.
They're planning how to divide up Negan's the Savior's property. Finally, the woman told Rick her name was Jotties. Her subordinates returned Rick and the others' weapons and slowly dispersed. Today's matter has come to an end like this. Rick walked out with a limp, a smile on his face. The plan to stand against Negan had finally made significant progress, and the other members also had smiles on their faces. Though uncertain if they would find the guns, they had at least found allies. After a while, Jotties sent people to return the stolen canned goods to Rick, which were essential for the community's survival. Gabriel apologizes to Rick for the other night, but Rick says as long as he's safe it's fine, and also finding allies who resisted the Saviors was a fortunate outcome. Gabriel felt touched by Rick's trust in him. Most people would have cursed him for taking all the supplies and assumed he ran away with them. However, Rick believed Gabriel was coerced and came all this way to find him. Even if Rick is surrounded by so many people and smiles at Gabriel when he sees that he's okay, that's from the bottom of his heart that he treats Gabriel as a family member. Gabriel feels fortunate that his previous transformation was aided by Rick's guidance and helped him grow. Gabriel is aware of how weak he used to be and firmly believes that in the future, they will defeat the Saviors and correct the chaos in this world. After some chatting, they prepared to head back to the community to regroup. The next step was to find the guns and take down the Saviors, a goal that seemed within reach now. Meanwhile, at the kingdom, it was time for the tribute day. Morgan and the others were waiting early. After about half an hour, the Saviors arrived. The same group as before, and the tribute seemed to go smoothly. Jared provocatively asked Richard to hand over the gun, saying that this is what he wanted. In the end, Jared and Richard got into another conflict, making the atmosphere tense. Ezekiel had no choice but to order Richard to give the gun to Jared. Jared wore a smirk on his face, tauntingly looking at Richard, as if to say, You think you can challenge the saviors? Richard suppressed his anger and reluctantly handed over the gun but couldn't resist adding some trash talk along with it. Jared was furious. He raised his hand to beat Richard. This time Morgan came to his aid and directly knocked the gun out of Jared's hand. Jared snatched Morgan's staff in anger and hit him on the ear. Benjamin stepped in and sent Jared flying. Gavin of the Saviors spoke up to stop it, a man who was actually more or less reasonable despite being of the Saviors. Richard wouldn't have survived if it had been anyone else. Gavin just warned Ezekiel that even though Jared started it, this kind of thing can't happen again or he'll be provoking the Saviors. Gavin's reminder was also well-intentioned, and after speaking, they prepared to leave. Morgan pleaded with Jared to return the staff, as it was a gift from a dear friend. It was only at Gavin's repeated requests that Jared left with the stick. The people present felt disheartened. When will these days end? Back at the kingdom, Daryl asked Morgan if they went to pay the tribute, and Morgan didn't deny it. Seeing the blood on Morgan's ear, Daryl could guess it was the Saviors' doing. Daryl didn't understand why they wouldn't agree to ally with Rick and chose to be so submissive. He continued, saying if Carol were here and saw Morgan getting beaten, and if she knew what happened to Abraham and Glenn, she would lead them to seek revenge and kill all the Saviors. Morgan didn't argue, acknowledging that Carol would indeed act that way. But Morgan also mentioned that this was the reason why Carol wanted to leave everyone behind. Daryl had nothing to say and left after watching Morgan for a while. Later, Daryl went to the shooting range where Richard was practicing with arrows. Richard was not allowed to carry guns anymore, so he practiced with a bow and arrows. However, Richard's archery skills were not that great. Richard handed the crossbow to Daryl, having heard that he was an excellent crossbowman. Then Richard led Daryl to a hidden place, an RV where Richard had secretly stored some firearms and weapons. He had also made many Molotov cocktails. Richard had always hated the Saviors and was eager to join forces with Rick and the others to kill them, but Ezekiel, the king, disagreed. Richard comes up with a ruse and prepares to do something to stir up Ezekiel's hatred. Richard leads Daryl to a road where there are abandoned trucks to hide behind without being noticed. Richard told Daryl that the Saviors had been passing through here a lot lately, about 3 or 5 of them. Richard needed Daryl's help because he couldn't handle it alone. They planned to attack the Saviors with guns and then burn them with Molotov cocktails to make their deaths more gruesome. The rest of the Saviors will be furious when they find the body. Richard left some clues along the road that would lead the Saviors to a woman whom Ezekiel cared about. She lived alone in a small cabin outside. Daryl had a hunch that Richard might be talking about Carol, so he kept asking Richard about the woman's name. Richard didn't think it mattered because the woman had guts and she might just survive. He explained that once the Saviors found her, they would definitely attack the woman, and Ezekiel, in his fury, would most likely agree to join forces with Rick. Daryl doesn't care about that right now. He just thinks it might be Carol. Richard also realized that they might know each other. Sighing, Richard tried to persuade Daryl to see the bigger picture. Daryl was furious because Carol was like family to him. He gathered his things and warned Richard to stay away from Carol. As they argued, they heard the sound of approaching cars, and it turned out to be the Saviors group. Daryl picked up his crossbow, ready to kill Richard if he made any moves. The two ended up wrestling as well. With cars whizzing past them, Richard continues to persuade Daryl, claiming that there are always sacrifices in war and that the woman would have died eventually anyway. Daryl was angry and told Richard that if anything happened to Carol, whether she died from zombies, illness, or being killed by others, he would kill Richard. With that said, Daryl took his weapon and left. He was going to follow the trail to find Carol. Half an hour later, Carol was reading a book when she heard a knock on the door. Thinking it was Ezekiel coming to see her, she opened the door, only to be stunned and even struggling to breathe for a moment. The person standing there was none other than Daryl. Daryl looked like a hurt child, with tears welling up in his eyes. They had been through so much during this time, and now seeing each other again brought overwhelming emotions. They had always had a close relationship within the group. That night, they sat inside the house and Carol explained the reason for her departure. She didn't want to lose anyone, especially not Daryl. It was a conflicting situation for Carol, as she would kill anyone who posed a threat to the group, but she feared becoming a killing machine. As they talked, Carol finally asked the question that had been on her mind. Daryl's answer confirmed her fears, and she burst into tears, realizing the possible outcome. Then Carol asked, trembling. Daryl hesitated, unsure whether he should tell her everything, fearing it might shatter her peaceful life. Carol let out a sigh of relief, glad that the community was safe. She couldn't bear the thought of losing Rick, Maggie, Glenn, Sasha, or anyone else. Later, they had dinner together.
Ezekiel.
Daryl seemed a bit jealous. Late at night, Daryl left the cabin. He told Carol to take care, and then disappeared into the darkness. The next day, Daryl left the kingdom and headed to the hilltop to prepare for what was to come. As hiding wasn't his style,